Experts are now becoming increasingly worried that the coronavirus is likely to become a pandemic. Obviously, it's currently an epidemic over in Asia, in China, but it could become a pandemic if it begins to spread over to other continents. Now, this is a chart of the coronavirus around the world, which I found. Obviously, so it's pretty much an epidemic over in Asia. And by the way, the definition of a pandemic is, if it's something is an epidemic in two or more continents. So the concern is that it could spread over to the United States or obviously to Europe, thereby becoming a pandemic. Now, so there's been some reported cases in California, one in Massachusetts, and then some in Illinois. It is spreading around this area and that area as well, which of course raises, the interesting question, a big concern, whether or not if this does become ultimately a pandemic and an epidemic in North America, could this affect the election? Could it ultimately aim to help Donald Trump win re-election? And I've seen some sort of Reddit posts about this, some people on Reddit being worried about this, and sort of the basis of their concern is that there have been studies in the past showing that if you prime people with sort of germs or bacteria or other dirty things, they are more likely to express anti-immigrant sentiment. Now, why that is the case is unclear. I mean, one theory suggests that, the sort of practical theory is that, look, people are worried about getting sick and having germs come in from other countries, and so they might associate immigrants with bringing over in diseases, and so it might raise anti-immigrant sentiment. Another theory is that the concept, the way in which we think of germs and think of bacteria is as a foreign agent coming into our body, so we use some kind of abstract metaphor where the nation is the body. And in any case, there's a bunch of different accounts, a bunch of different theories for why this is the case, but there have been multiple studies suggesting that there is some kind of correlation between if you prime people with germs and with dirtiness, they are more likely to express some kind of anti-immigrant sentiment. So the concern then, of course, is could this help Donald Trump win the election? And, if I'm going to give you sort of my 2 cents on it, I don't think so. I don't ultimately think so, because you'll notice in those studies, two things have to be present, right? First of all, it's obviously going to have to become a serious issue in the United States. It would have to, become an epidemic in North America specifically and in the United States. And the second thing, of course, though, would be that Republicans would have to succeed in messaging the 2020 election as a referendum on immigration. And it's unclear that they would be able to do that, considering that that's exactly, you'll remember, what they tried to do with the 2018 midterms, but ultimately failed to do. They were unable to do that. Instead, Democrats were able to successfully message the 2018 midterms as a referendum on healthcare and a debate about healthcare. And of course, you could imagine that a debate over healthcare, if Democrats are successful in making that case, that ultimately the 2020 election is a debate over healthcare, which is, the number one thing on voters' minds when polled. If it's a debate over healthcare, it could actually end up turn around and sort of helping the Democrats. So if it does have an impact, I mean, it wouldn't be super ultimately, if it did ultimately help Donald Trump, it would be like, well, that's sort of in line with sort of the research. But I doubt that it's going to, because it's going to ultimately, the Republicans are going to have to succeed in that kind of messaging. The other thing to keep in mind is, and we talk a lot on this channel how I don't believe that Bernie Sanders is unelectable. There's a lot of people in the mainstream media who might try to say that, but we've talked on the mainstream, we've talked on this channel how I think that Bernie Sanders is more electable. Now, one of the arguments, which I haven't heard anyone actually making yet, so I want to make this argument, is that actually the fact that Bernie Sanders is able to bring in Latinos is, polling really well with Latinos is super, super important for winning in the general election. One of the things which Donald Trump has recognized, or at least his campaign has recognized, is that it's actually very important for him to be running Spanish language ads. In fact, actually, I saw a video on TYT, and this was months and months ago when sort of this stuff came out. They were kind of like, why is he doing this? This is wasting his money. And actually, that's wrong. That's actually wrong in my judgment. This is actually very smart from the Trump campaign. They're not trying to win Latino voters. They know that they're not going to succeed in that. But all they have to do is get Latino voters to think that, oh, he's not such a terrible guy, that they're going to come out and vote. Because in the 2018 midterm, it wasn't just one of the sort of narratives we hear on the mainstream media is the 2018 midterms went to the Democrats because a bunch of sort of wine moms, a bunch of white suburban women went out and voted against Donald Trump. And that's true. But also the story which is being sort of underplayed in that narrative is that Latinos came out to vote in large numbers. In fact, nearly, something like almost half of Latinos in the 2018 midterms were never even contacted by any presidential campaign. Or, none of them came out and like even contacted them in any way, but still many of them came out to vote. But Latinos, it's actually super, super important that Donald Trump not get Latinos to then turn around and register to vote, because nearly 47% of Latinos who are eligible to vote are not even registered to vote, right? So when I say that that Latinos is like winning the Latino vote is super, super important, in terms of a general election strategy, that's what I mean, right? And again, the Donald Trump campaign, they recognize this. That's why they're running a lot of Spanish language ads. In fact, there was a point in this past election cycle where it's not the case anymore, but for a while there, Donald Trump's campaign had ran more Spanish language ads than all of the Democratic candidates combined. Again, that's not the case anymore, but it was for quite a while. The Donald Trump campaign is really trying to target Latinos, but again, it's not necessarily that they're trying to get them to vote for Donald Trump. They just need to convince the Latino voters, convince them, hey, Donald Trump isn't this big scary guy. I don't need to go out and register to vote. That's their angle. That's the strategy with this whole thing. Now, how does this relate to the issue of healthcare? Well, when it comes to Bernie Sanders being effective on the issue of immigration, I think even if it does turn out that that Republicans are able to successfully persuade voters that this is a referendum on immigration, I think that electing Bernie Sanders will make it more, it'll sort of negate some of that concern, because Bernie Sanders being effective with Latinos may be able to get them to raise voter turnout and raise the possibility of Latinos coming out and voting against Donald Trump. So I think that, if it does have any kind of impact, the coronavirus, it's going to be at the margins. And I think that Bernie Sanders, compared to possibly some of the other candidates, would be, maybe be able to negate some of that. But regardless, I doubt that the Republicans are going to be able to succeed in messaging it as a debate over immigration, because they failed to do it in the 2018 midterms. Instead, it became a debate over healthcare, and a debate over healthcare. I mean, you could argue, there isn't clear evidence, there isn't sort of studies conducted on this in the way that there's studies conducted on the relationship between germs, dirt, and immigration. But it could very well be plausible that a debate over healthcare, when we're talking about a coronavirus, could ultimately end up helping Democrats. So it's unlikely that there's going to be any effect, but we'll have to see. But that's sort of where the literature stands, and that's sort of my view on it. So in any case, if you like the video, I'd really appreciate it if you hit the like button and consider subscribing. Thanks.